Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video where we see how to simplify the installation of Windows Server 2008 using Windows Deployment Services. In this video, I'll start off by talking to you a little bit about what we have to do on our network to get ready for Windows Deployment Services, or you'll see here I have WDS for short. Then we'll actually go in and take a look at our network where we will install WDS, we'll deploy a couple servers using WDS, and then we'll see how to further automate the installations using answer files, which we will create using the Windows Automated Installation Kit, and then of course add that answer file to WDS and see how it all comes together. So first of all, what is WDS? Well, Windows Deployment Services is a role which has been included with Windows Server 2008, and it's used to do remote installations of Windows Server 2008 or Windows Vista. Now in this video we're going to stay primarily on the deployment of Windows Server 2008, but this is a service that can really come in handy when deploying your Vista clients as well. Now before we install WDS, there are a few requirements that have to be met. First of all, we must have Active Directory up and running. Matter of fact, not only do we have to have Active Directory up and running, but whatever server you decide to install the WDS role on, the WDS server must be a member of the domain, and it'll even be authorized within Active Directory. And this is all done to help keep the environment secure, because when it comes to deploying out images of operating systems, well, there can be some security issues there. And as we go through, I'll point out some additional security tactics that you can practice. Now, the second requirement that we have here really almost doesn't even need mentioning, and that is you must have DNS in place as well. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I thought DNS was pretty important. Why is it not worth mentioning? Well, it is important. The only reason it's barely worth mentioning is because in order to have Active Directory, well, you must have DNS already in place to support it. So pretty much if you've met the first requirement, well, you've met the second one as well. So the third requirement is you must have a DHCP server ready to hand out IP addresses to the clients who want to get images from the Windows Deployment Server. And the last requirement is that you must have an NTFS partition to store the images on the WDS server. Now here's the thing, you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course I have an NTFS partition. I mean, pretty much everything's NTFS these days. Although that may be true, remember that these images can end up using quite a bit of space, so you may want to have a dedicated partition for these images. Alright, well, that's pretty much what WDS is. It's a service that we can use to help push out operating systems to client machines without having to carry DVDs around. Okay, I mean, that's going to be the real main benefit, is that you just, instead of going to each machine and having to have a DVD, you can just go ahead and install across the network. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the Global Mantix network, and we will first of all install the WDS role on one of our servers. We'll deploy a couple of servers using WDS. We'll create that answer file, and then we will, like I said in the beginning, bring it all together using that answer file to deploy a third server. So let's go take a look now. Okay, so the computer that I'm on right now is the Global Mantix Forest Root Domain Controller. This is New York DC1, and really this is the only server that we have up and running. We created it in the last video, and at the end of the last video I told you that you needed to have a couple of other domain controllers up and running in order to have the globalmantix.com forest in place. And that was, you needed to have a domain controller in Chicago for the North America domain and a domain controller in Tokyo for the Asia domain. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to use Windows Deployment Services to deploy those two servers. Now, what Global Mantix is doing is something that is typical in many global environments. Rather than creating servers in their respective locations, what you do is you create all the servers in a local office where all the servers can talk to one another quickly and easily. And then once the server has been completely configured, you go ahead and ship it out to the city where it belongs. So that's what we're going to do here. Is we're going to do everything in New York, and then at that point we will have all our domain controllers up in place, and we'll go ahead and ship them out to their respective cities. All right. With that being said, what we need to do is install the Windows Deployment Services role. And in order to do this, we need to make sure that we are meeting the minimum requirements to have this role in place. And the first one is that you have to have Active Directory in place, which we do. We have globalmantics.com. And you must make sure that the computer that you're installing this on is a member of the domain, which again, in this case, it is, because this is the forest root domain controller. And I have to tell you, that's something that maybe would not be so typical. I would not recommend typically using your forest root domain controller to deploy other computers on your network. Matter of fact, I wouldn't use the forest root for much of anything else. But we're going to go ahead and use it here just because it's the only one we have. Now, the second requirement was DNS, and of course we also have DNS in place. We needed to in order to have Active Directory in place. The third requirement is DHCP. We have no DHCP on our network, so we're going to start off by installing that role. So I'm going to click on Start, Server Manager, and then in the Server Manager, I'm going to go ahead and click on Roles, and then I'm going to add a role. So you'll see right now that we have Active Directory, Domain Services, and DNS, so we have those two in place. I'm going to go ahead and add a role, and the role I'm going to add is DHCP. Then I'm going to click Next. Here's just your typical introduction screen. Next. Here's the network card we want to bind DHCP to, meaning this is the card. It's the only card in the computer, but the one that we're going to communicate to DHCP clients with. Next. Here I have the domain of globalmantics.com, the DNS server that we use for globalmantics.com, so we're okay there. Click on Next. We don't need WINs for this network, so I will click Next. And now I'm going to add a scope. This is a range of IP addresses that we're going to hand out to our clients. So I will click on Add, and the scope name will be New York Clients. And we'll give it a starting IP address of 192.168.10 because that's the network that we're on. Now, we've already allocated the 200 range of IP addresses, meaning 200 is for our router, 201 through, we'll say, 210 or 220, whatever we end up needing is going to be for static IPs for our servers. So for our clients, why don't we say we'll start at 101 and we'll give it an ending IP address of 192.168.10. Now in this case, I'm going to say 120. Now, typically you would want to make sure this range was enough for all the clients that you had out on your network. But in this case, we're only using this DHCP server to set up WDS clients. And we're never going to be installing more than a couple at a time. So 20 should be more than sufficient. The subnet mask will be 255.255.255.0. And our default gateway, of course, is 192.168.10.200. And we will go ahead and activate this scope now, meaning it'll be ready to go. Click OK. And Next. We will leave DHCP v6 stateless mode in place because we're not going to be configuring IP version 6. Next. Even though we're not configuring IP version 6, you need to enter something in for a preferred DNS server before it'll let you go on. I put in ::1, which is the IPv6 version of localhost, or point to myself, because I am a DNS server. So I'll go ahead and click on Next. I will use the current credentials as the globalmantics administrator to authorize this DHCP server to make it valid within Active Directory. If I was logged in as somebody other than the administrator, then I would want to use alternate credentials to go ahead and authorize. So I'll click on Next. And here's a review screen, and I'll click Install. Now, as is with the previous video, because we're doing a lot of installations here, there's going to be a number of times that I'm going to need to pause the video, and if you're following along with all the steps, you're going to also want to pause the video and then resume once that step is complete, so as to save time rather than just staring at a bar going across the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video now, and I will resume as soon as the DHCP server service role has been installed. Okay, the DHCP server installation has succeeded, so we can go ahead and click on Close. And now you'll see here that we have Active Directory Domain Services, DHCP server, and DNS server roles all installed on this computer. Now, the last requirement that we have for WDS is an NTFS partition that we can use to go ahead and store these images. Now, this particular computer only has a single 80 gig hard drive, and we've already configured it as a single partition of 80 gig, so there's not a whole lot more we can do with this particular computer. Again, if you have more than one hard drive, or if you've already configured for more than one partition, make sure that that additional partition has been formatted NTFS, and we'll use it. But in the meantime, we're ready to go. We can install the Windows Deployment Services role. So I'm going to click on Add Roles once again, and this time I'm going to go ahead and click the box for Windows Deployment Services. And then go ahead and click on Next. Here you get an introduction into what Windows Deployment Services is. I'll go ahead and click on Next. Now we get to choose specifically which services we want to install, and pretty much typically you're going to have both boxes checked. Transport Server is a stripped down version of Windows Deployment Services, and Deployment Server is the full-blown role. It says over here, Deployment Server provides full functionality, and if you highlight Transport Server, you'll see that it's a subset of the functionality, and it really is a requirement in order to have the deployment server. So we're going to leave both boxes checked and go ahead and click on Next, because we want a full functionality WDS server. Now there's not a whole lot else that it asks you at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on Install. And then once again, here we have a bar that's going to go across the screen, so I'll go ahead and pause the video for just a few moments while we wait, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, so once again, you can see here that the Windows Deployment Services installation has succeeded, so I will click Close to close this window. And you can see that we now have 4 roles installed on this New York DC1 server. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Server Manager, click on Start, select Administrative Tools, and you'll see here that we have an entry for Windows Deployment Services. So I'm going to click on that, and that will open up the utility that we use to manage Windows Deployment Services. Alright, the first thing you'll see here is that there's not a whole lot to this screen right now other than servers. When I click on servers, you'll see here that by default it does give the local server. If you ever wanted to manage additional WDS servers, all you'd have to do is right click and select Add Server, and again, local computer already is in place, but you could pick another computer if you had another Windows Deployment Services server. But the New York DC1 computer is the computer we want to manage. That's the one we've just installed. You'll notice we have a yellow triangle with an exclamation point in it. And that's because it's not yet configured. So the very next step is we need to configure WDS. And we do that, this is really tough, right click and configure server. And here you get the Windows Deployment Services configuration wizard. And you'll see here that they're going to tell us what the minimum requirements are: Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, and an NTFS partition. Click on Next. Now we need to pick a location where we're going to store the images that are going to be deployed out to our client machines. Now, as I mentioned before, I only have one partition, one drive, and that's the C drive. So I'm going to go ahead and take the default, which is to create a remote install folder on the C drive. Again, if you had another partition available or another hard drive available would be even better. You would go ahead and browse to that location, Typically, you do want to keep it with the remote install name on the folder. Uh, Everything's set up to look for that name, so it just makes sense to stick with it. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And you'll see here that it says the volume selected is also the Windows System volume. It's not recommended to do this. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I'm sure. Now, this next screen has to do with the fact that this computer is also our DHCP server. If we had a separate DHCP server running on the network, then this wouldn't be an issue. But because this computer is also the DHCP server, we want to go ahead and check both of these boxes. We want to tell it not to listen on port 67, which is the port that's used for our DHCP broadcasts. And we want to configure what's called option 60 to the Pixie client. And what that basically has to do with is that has to do with letting the client who gets an IP address from this machine as a DHCP server know the presence of Windows deployment services. Okay, so basically, here's the real simple answer for you. The simple answer is if the computer that you're installing this role on is also a DHCP server, check the boxes. If it's not, then don't check the boxes. Alright, so that's the easy way. Alright, let's go ahead and click on Next. Now we have our Pixie server initial settings. Our choices are we can choose not to respond to any client. And I will tell you what, while you're configuring a WDS server, it might not be a bad idea to leave that selection checked because you don't really want clients to start trying to communicate with the WDS server before you're done setting up. Okay, and so by saying don't respond, you're basically saying, look, let me finish configuring and then go back in and manually change to one of these other selections. Now, another choice would be to respond only to known client computers. What this means is that if you want to use these services, but only to specific computers that have already been set up to allow this, and basically that's done by what's called pre-staging the computer accounts. That means going into Active Directory and creating the computer account before the computer actually exists. And in order to do this, by the way, you have to know what the GUID, or GUID as some people call it, GUID, Global Unique Identifier, is of the client computer. So that is something you can do, and it does help to keep your environment secure because you're only responding to known clients. Or you can respond to everybody. You can respond to pretty much anybody that comes in and says, "Hi, I need an operating system. Want to help me out?" Now, this obviously creates a bit of a security situation because you don't want somebody who wanders into your network to suddenly get a deployment of Windows Server 2008 on you, right? So one of the things you may want to do if you're going to respond to all clients is check the box saying if it's anybody unknown, meaning if it's not an already pre-staged account, notify the administrator and only respond after an administrator approves it. So that way an administrator can go ahead and still have control over some stranger coming in and trying to connect to your WDS server. Now what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and check the button saying respond to everybody. I'm going to create the unsecure environment because what I have going on here is I'm in a very secure, isolated test network, and I know that there are no clients other than the ones that I'm controlling who may try to connect. And so I'm not real worried about it. But again, in a true production environment, you may want to do one of these first two buttons, or if you're going to do the third, check the box. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. And now it's going to go ahead and configure Windows Deployment Services. And while it does, yeah, I know, you're thinking, he's going to pause the video and he'll be right back with me as soon as it's done. Nope. It went by too quick for me to have to bother doing that. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and finish the configuration. You'll notice that there's a checkbox here for adding images to the Windows Deployment Server now. So we can choose to do that now, or I can do that separately after the fact. I'll go ahead and do it now because it is the next step with configuration. So I'll click Finish. And now I need to enter the path and file name of a Windows image. Now there's a couple of things that I want you to know about these images. First of all, right up here, you'll see here it says by default, boot and install images are stored in the same location. You should know that there are two different types of images. The install images are the images that are actually used to install the operating systems. So, for instance, if we want to install Windows Server 2008 Enterprise Edition, there'll need to be an image for that particular operating system. Boot images are used by the client computer, or really, I should say, to boot the client computer before an operating system is actually installed. In other words, if we're going to connect across the network with a computer that has a blank hard drive, there's nothing on it, well, we need something to boot off of, and that's what the boot image is. Now, the other thing I want you to know is that the Windows Server 2008 DVD comes with a default boot and install image. So before we go anywhere else, I want to show you this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Start, and I'm going to go ahead and explore the computer here. So I'll right click and select Explore, so that we can go to the CD drive where I have my Windows Server 2008 DVD already inserted. And you'll notice on this DVD there is a Sources folder, and in the Sources folder, if I scroll down a little bit, first of all, here we have the boot.wim file. Okay, so this is the boot image file. And scroll down just a little bit further. Here you'll see install.wim, and that is the install image file. So what we want to do, and let me go ahead and close this window, is over here back in the wizard, we want to go ahead and browse to that location. Now, if your Windows Server 2008 DVD files are stored out on a server, well, then you would browse to that location on the server. So I'm going to go ahead and click Browse, and go ahead and expand the computer here, expand the DVD drive, and highlight the Sources folder, and click OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on Next, and what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and find all the image files that are in that location. Now, the next thing we have here is something called an image group. And basically, if you have a lot of images that are all similar, for instance, this particular default install.wim file technically points to 6 different operating systems. It points to Windows Server 2008 Standard, Enterprise, and Data Center, and then also all 3 of those in a Server Core Edition. So because those are all similar, we want to go ahead and group them together. And so here it's going to create an image group. The default name is Image Group 1. If you don't plan on having a lot of these different types of images in your network, then just selecting the default name would be fine. If you do plan on having different operating system, different groups, then you may want to go ahead and change the name. So how about we say server, we'll say 2K8 for 2008 images. Okay, so that'll be the name of this particular image group. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And here's just a quick, this is what we're going to do. Here's the location where we're going to find our images. We're naming it Server 2008 Images. You'll notice there's 1 boot image, but there's 6 install images. And we know that all to be correct, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And now it's going to go ahead and add all 7 of these images into the Windows deployment server. This will take a few moments, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come right back with you as soon as all of these images have loaded. Okay, the images have all been added to the server, so all that's left to do now is go ahead and click Finish. And now we have successfully added the images to this server, and quite frankly, we are ready to begin deploying. But before we do, there's a couple of other things I'd like to show you. First of all, I want to show you the property sheet for the WDS server. So let's right click on our server and select Properties. Now, be careful. I know lots of times Properties is found down at the bottom of the menu. I know a number of people who have, and yes, I'll admit it, I'm one of them, who immediately assumed it was at the bottom and went ahead and clicked Help. That's not going to get you there. They've moved the property selection all the way up here near the top of the menu. So I'm going to select Properties, And let's take a look at some of these tabs that we have here. The General tab has just general information about this particular server. If we go to the Pixie Response Settings tab, you'll see a screen that we've seen before. This is where you can go in and change your response setting from how you did it during the original setup wizard. As for instance, I had recommended that we start off saying do not respond to any client computer until we're fully configured. Well, this is how you would go in and make the change after the fact. Now the next tab says Directory Services, and on this tab, this is where we are going to come up with the format for the naming of these computers. Now, in the event that you were going to go ahead and deploy, let's say an entire room full of computers, and quite honestly, this is something that would be more appropriate for a client operating system. So let's say you were going to do a whole room full of Vista client computers, let's say in a call center. And maybe you wanted to go ahead and have them all have the same name with sequential numbers. As you can see here, it's going to put in username, and then this little number sign at the end here is going to represent a sequential number. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and we could put in, actually I need percent, there we go. I could do something like that, and now it would be call center 1, call center 2, etc., etc. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do server, and then we'll just name them server 1, server 2, server 3, etc., etc. Because in the case of a server, you're not really going to have a sequential numbering system. There is no quote-unquote naming policy. You're probably going to want to go ahead and assign an individual name to the server after it's been installed. And that's what we're going to do here. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy a couple of servers, but those servers are eventually going to become Chicago DC1 and Tokyo DC1, but I'm going to handle that manually after the operating system has been installed. Now, the next tab that I want to show you is this Client tab. The Client tab is where you can go ahead and set up Windows deployment services to be run in an unattended mode. Now, I want you to be real careful about your understanding of this. This would be to make it that the actual Windows deployment services process is unattended, as opposed to the installation of the operating system being unattended. I know that might sound like one and the same, but I'll show you when we go to actually do the deployment the difference between them. This is to simply automate the Windows deployment, or I guess the best way to describe it would be to automate the boot image process, as opposed to, in a few moments I'll show you how to automate the install image. And don't worry, it'll all make sense when I show you. It's probably confusing right now, but I'll show you in a minute. Now the next tab is DHCP, and this is again where we could go ahead and choose to change our settings regarding these two checkboxes that we had selected during setup. We have the Network Settings tab, and this really has to do with if you are going to need some kind of specialized multicast range of IP addresses. As for instance, maybe this particular default range is already being used in your organization for some other multicast purpose, then you may go to a different range. If you're not using this range for any other multicast purpose, typically you just leave it alone. And so that's most of the significant properties of the Windows deployment server. So let me go ahead and click OK. And then the next thing I would like to show you is I'd like to show you how to set up a multicast transmission, because this is one of the key benefits to using Windows deployment services. I can tell you that I have been out at a client where we needed to deploy 45 images, and they were fairly simplistic images, out to 45 different machines. It was one image, I should say, out to 45 different machines. And when we tried to do so simultaneously without using multicast, meaning using pure unicast technology, what that meant was that this particular server had to hand out 45 images separately at the same time over 100 megabit Ethernet. And it was approximately a 2 gig image. So do the math. You're trying to push down 2 gigs 45 times all across the network over 100 megabit Ethernet. Guess what? It didn't work. Matter of fact, my recollection is only 5 of the 45 even tried to install. 40 of them just said, I give up. And of the 5, one of them ended up being a corrupted installation. So out of the 45 machines that needed an operating system, I got 4. So needless to say, that didn't go so well. And what we had to do is we had to slow it down. And if I remember correctly, we ended up having to do approximately 10 computers at a time. And then the network was able to handle it. And the server was able to handle it. Well, now using multicast, we have the ability to go ahead and transmit once and then have all, however many machines it is, let's say it was those 45, receive that one transmission simultaneously. So let's see how to do this. I'm going to go ahead and expand the server. And then here we have multicast transmissions. Now I'm going to right click and select create multicast transmission. Now I need to give a name for the transmission. So how about we just call this deploy, if I could spell, deploy 2. Because we're going to deploy, actually I'll call it deploy 2 servers. Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to deploy 2 servers. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And now we need to select an image that we want to use. Now don't be confused by the fact that this says Windows Longhorn. Now let me go ahead and expand this out a little bit here. Windows Longhorn was the beta name for Windows Server 2008, and you'll still find it existing in different places within the operating system. And by the time that you're watching this video, they may have worked that all out through different final releases, service packs, etc., etc. But anyway, here we have the image group, Server 2008 images that we created, and here are the 6 images. And the one that we want to push down is Windows Server 2008 Enterprise Edition, the one that's highlighted right on top. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And now what we're going to do is schedule this multicast. Now you could schedule it to start at a specific time. So as a for instance, maybe you wanted to go ahead and roll out these images overnight. But what I typically like to do is go ahead and say start automatically after a certain number of clients are ready to receive this image. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and make the threshold here 2. So what I'm saying is once 2 clients have connected to this Windows Deployment Services server and are ready to receive an image, we will then begin to deploy that image, and it'll go to both machines at the same time. So let me go ahead and click on Next. And the task is complete. So I'll click Finish. And now here I have the Deploy 2 Servers multicast transmission ready to go. Matter of fact, you'll see here, let me go ahead and span this out. You'll see it's in a current status of waiting. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let's highlight Deploy 2 Servers, because this is the screen I want you to watch as I have 2 servers attempt to connect. Now, let's go do that now. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the computer that is going to become Chicago DC1. Okay, so now once again you are looking at a blank screen because we need to turn on this computer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the switch now. And you'll see here that we have now started this computer. And it says here, press F12 for network boot. And I have not hit F12. And I specifically did not hit F12 because I wanted you to see that you only have, I've never really timed it, but it seems like it's maybe like 10 seconds or so to go ahead and hit F12. And if you don't, well, then it doesn't do the network services boot. It doesn't do the Pixie boot. And since there's no operating system on this computer, on the hard drive or anywhere else, it says operating system not found. So I'm going to go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete to reboot the machine, and this time I'll hit F12 so you can see what happens. Okay, I'm rebooting. It's getting an IP address from DHCP, and now it says press F12, and before we lose it, there we go, I hit F12. Now you'll see that Windows is loading files. Matter of fact, this looks a lot like when you boot off the operating system DVD, doesn't it? And down at the bottom, you'll see that there's an IP address listed there. that IP address is of the WDS server. That's the IP address of New York DC1, which we have set up as our Windows Deployment Services server. So this will take just another moment here to finish loading the files. And I'll tell you what, the very next screen that you're going to see is again going to look just like when we install the operating system. It's going to be the nice, pretty, I don't know, silverish gray that Microsoft has gone with. Oh, first we have to look at the loading bar. There we go. And there we go. There's our nice, fancy window. And okay. Here you'll see now it says Windows Deployment Services. That's telling us, hey, you are doing a Windows Deployment Services installation. We're going to go ahead and say that we are in the United States speaking English. Use the US keyboard. Go ahead and click on Next. Now it wants me to enter the credentials to be able to go ahead and connect to this WDS server. Now I want to show you something because again, this is a common mistake that people have made. If I just go ahead and enter administrator and put in my password and click OK, you'll see here that it says an error has occurred and it says it's not a properly formed account name. I'm going to click OK. And the reason why is you'll notice here it says enter your name as either domain/user or user@domain. Okay, and meaning you have to enter the name of the domain that you're trying to connect to. So I'm going to put in Globalmantics administrator, if I could spell, and put in my password. And this time when I click OK, it's going to go ahead and let me connect. Once it connects, it's going to ask me about the 6 different operating systems. Which one do I want to install? I want to install Windows Server 2008 Enterprise Edition. I'm going to click on Next. It's going to ask me about hard drive allocation. Do I want to partition? Do I want to format? What do I want to do? I have a single 80 gig hard drive, and that's okay for me. I'm just going to format it as a single partition, just as we've done before. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. Notice how everything up till now pretty much looks almost like we just put in the Windows Server 2008 DVD. But we didn't need a DVD. There is no DVD in this computer right now. Now this screen says it's waiting for the server. And this bar is just going to keep going across again and again and again and again until the server is ready to go ahead and distribute this image to me. But see, the server is essentially, if I don't do anything, never going to be ready. And the reason why is because we said we want to do a multicast transmission and only after 2 computers have connected. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and connect to the computer that's going to be Tokyo DC1 and do the exact same thing. Okay, here on Tokyo we are again looking at a blank machine, so let me go ahead and turn on the computer. It's getting an IP address from DHCP, it wants F12, so I'll hit F12. And now we're going to begin the same process. Now, while we are waiting for this to load the files, I want to go ahead and switch back to New York DC1. Okay, here on New York DC1, I want to show you that here where it says deploy 2 servers, screen's still blank. I want to show you that this screen does not refresh on its own. So you could either hit the refresh button here or you could hit F5 on your keyboard. And when I do, you'll notice that one client is already waiting. Okay, it's been connected for a minute and it is waiting. And that's the computer that we already connected, what's going to be Chicago DC1. So now I want to go ahead and connect back over to Tokyo DC1 where it'll finish loading the files and we can go through the quick little wizard and get it ready to connect, and then we'll watch the image begin to deploy. Okay, so back here on Tokyo, or at least the computer that's going to be Tokyo DC1, I'm going to go ahead and click on Next, enter my credentials, and the password, and go ahead and select Server Enterprise. Just a single hard disk, that's fine. And now you'll see that this one is also waiting. Now what I want to do is go ahead and pop back over here to my New York DC1 computer. And let's hit refresh one more time. And you'll see that both computers are now connected. And it's still waiting, but if we give it just a moment, I'm going to actually refresh a couple more times. There we go. It shows that the status is 2%, meaning it has begun the installation process. So if I switch back over to the first computer, which is going to be Chicago DC1, you will see that it is now installing Windows. And it says that's all the information we need right now, and the computer will restart several times during the installation. It's copying, expanding, installing, completing, all the stuff that we see during a regular installation. Now let's go ahead and switch over to the Tokyo computer. Okay, you're just going to have to take my word for it. I have switched over to the Tokyo computer, and you'll notice it's at the exact same point. Copying files 20%, 21%. Switch back over to Chicago. It's at 21, 22. Okay, you'll notice they're at essentially the exact same place on both computers. And the reason why is because it's a multicast. One transmission, both computers are receiving that transmission simultaneously. All right, now this is going to take, depending on the speed of your machine, could be anywhere 10, 20, 30 minutes total. So before I pause and let this process complete, let me explain to you the difference between the unattended installations. Everything up to this point would have been done with that screen that I already showed you. Matter of fact, let me pop back over to New York DC1. Everything that we've done, if I go to the properties of our server and go to the client tab, would have been automated if we would have enabled an unattended installation and connected with what's called an answer file to automate those few clicks that we had to do. In other words, the screen where we had to select what locale and what keyboard and which version of the operating system and what kind of partitioning information we wanted to do, we can actually automate that right here on this screen. To automate the actual installation, that needs to be done somewhere else. So let me go ahead and cancel out of here. And I'm going to show you where that is done after we complete the installations. So I'm going to switch back over to, well, we'll go to the Chicago computer. And now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be right back with you as soon as it is done with this step of the installation. Okay, so that portion of the installation has completed. And before we go any further, let me just explain that this part that we're about to do is the part that can then be automated as far as from an installation image point of view. So that's why I didn't want to show you yet, and I'll show you in just a few moments after you see what it is that we would be automating. Here we have to go ahead and finish setting up Windows, so I need to go ahead and set up the country or region, currency, layout, click Next. I need to go ahead and agree to the license agreement, click Next, and it looks like that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, wait a minute. He just said that we can automate that. Well, isn't that kind of ridiculous? I mean, there's really not much to it. It's just two screens. Well, it's not just two screens. See, because the rest of the installation is really done by a final configuration that's done after we log in to the operating system for the first time. Just as you've seen before in the initial configuration task wizard. There's a lot more that we can do to set up the operating system. Alright, now before we go any further, let me go ahead and connect us to the Tokyo computer and go through the same steps. I'll click Next, and then Agree, and Next, and Start. And now both the Chicago and Tokyo computers have been installed, and all we need to do at this point is all the things that we learned about in the previous video, which is going through the initial configuration task wizard. And in this case, because they're going to be domain controllers, go ahead and install the Active Directory Domain Services role and make them domain controllers for the child domains North America, or NA, globalmantics.com, and asia.globalmantics.com. But what I'd like to show you now is I'd like to head on back over to New York DC1 to create an answer file to go ahead and automate the rest of the Windows installation that we would do at that final configuration. Okay, so here on New York DC1, by the way, if I go ahead and hit refresh one more time, you'll notice that it says there's no more items to show because, well, there's no more connections. We're done. We've made the 2 connections, we've deployed, and that transmission is over. So I'm going to actually go ahead and delete. Let's go ahead and delete this multicast transmission because we're going to go ahead and do a single transmission, and we're going to do it with an unattended answer file. So first of all, let me go ahead and click on the install images here and expand that, and here's our server 2008 images. Go ahead and expand this so we can see it. What I'm going to do is go ahead and right click on Windows Longhorn, aka Windows Server 2008 Server Enterprise image, and go to its properties. Because on this property sheet, down here there's a checkbox that says allow image to install in unattended mode. And when I check that box, I then have to select an unattended answer file. Well, we don't have an unattended answer file yet, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. And I'm going to show you how to go ahead and create that file. Now, there are essentially 3 ways that you could create this unattended answer file. One way would be from scratch. If you are big into scripting and programming, these unattended answer files are written in XML, and if you know how they're formatted, you can just start with a blank text document basically and start coding. Not too many people are going to want to do it that way. So another option is to go out and find somebody else's answer file. There are a number of them out on the internet. As a matter of fact, Microsoft even has some out on their own website to help get you started. And then you can just modify the existing answer file. Or the third way would be to use the Windows Automated Installation Kit to go ahead and get assistance in creating this file. And that's what we're going to do now. Now, the first thing that has to be done in order to use the Windows Automated Installation Kit is to copy the install.wim file off of your Windows Server 2008 DVD and put it on your hard drive. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that I actually just went ahead and did that on the DVD itself in the sources folder. Again, remember, we have the install.wim file. All I did was went ahead and copied it over to the root of my C drive. And you'll see here that if I go to do it again, it's going to ask me if I want to replace the one that's already there. I'm going to hit cancel. I did that to go ahead and save time. If you're following along, go ahead and do that as well. Now, the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and install the Windows Automated Installation Kit. Now, this is a free download from Microsoft. I've already downloaded it and burned it to a DVD. So let me go ahead and put that DVD in now. Okay, I put in the DVD, and here the autoplay comes up. And I'm going to go ahead and run the Start CD, because this is going to take us right into the Windows Automated Installation Kit. I'm going to click on Windows 8 IK Setup, and we'll go through a very basic installation here. Really, there's not much to do in this setup other than click next a few times. Have to agree to the license agreement, of course, but that's pretty much it. So I'll go ahead and click on next. I agree, next, next, and next. And now it'll take just a few moments while it installs the kit. So let me go ahead and pause the video. This shouldn't take long, 30 to 60 seconds, and then I'll be right back with you when it's complete. Okay, the installation is complete, so let's click on Close to exit out of that wizard. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Exit to exit out of the Windows Automated Installation Kit tool altogether. And what I want to do is I want to now look for one specific tool within this kit called the Windows System Image Master, or Windows SIM tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Start, All Programs. Here's the Windows AIK, Automated Installation Kit. And here I have the Windows System Image Manager. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now I will tell you that this automated installation kit has a lot of other features with it that can really assist you if you're doing mass deployments on your network. This is more typical for the client side of things. Again, if you were going to do mass deployments of Vista, and that's really what a lot of this is designed for. So we're going to keep this right in the scope of creating a simple answer file for Windows Server 2008. Now the first thing we need to do here is we need to actually select that image file that we copied over to the hard drive. So I'm going to right click and select Windows Image. Now I need to go ahead and browse to, well, it's actually already defaulted to the root of my C drive. So C drive, here's install.wim. Go ahead and select that. And now I need to select which image within that file. Remember, there's 6 of them. So I'm going to pick Server Enterprise. Click OK. And here, this is actually why we needed to move it to the hard drive. It says that the catalog file cannot be opened for the following reason. Can't find a catalog file associated with this image. So we need to go ahead and create the catalog file. And this is really a file that helps us to navigate throughout the image and locate where certain installation features are going to be located. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Yes. And again, if this was on the DVD, well, we wouldn't be able to create this catalog file because it's creating it in the same location where the image file is, and we can't write to the DVD. So this will take just another moment, and then once it's complete, we're going to go ahead and enter a couple of settings that we want to have automated, and then we're going to go ahead and deploy the image with these settings automated, and I'll show you how they actually work. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be right back with you as soon as this is done. Okay, the catalog file has been created, and as you can see here, we now have an image. And what we need to do next, after creating the image, or I should say selecting the image, is we need to go ahead and create an answer file based upon this image. So right up here, I'm going to right click and select New Answer File. And here you'll see that we have components and packages, just like we have down here on the image. And there are 7 different components that make up the answer file. And again, this can get quite sophisticated, but we're going to keep this fairly simple for right now. I will tell you that there is a lot of research that you would need to do in order to learn how to create the exact answer file for all the specifics that you may want on any given server. But we're going to go ahead and select a couple of common settings. So first of all, over here back on the image, I'm going to expand components, and you will see that there are a lot of components here. That's why I'm saying there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the automated configuring of a server. And right here, I'm going to go ahead and expand Windows Unattended Join. And then here we have identification. I'm going to expand that. And credentials. Now, what this setting is this has to do with if you want the server to automatically join the domain and do so with specific credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and select Add Setting to Pass 4 Specialize. That's the only choice that we have here. Under Specialize, let me go ahead and select that. You will see over in the answer file, we now have the ability to go ahead and enter these credentials. So we're going to say for the domain globomantics.com, we want to go ahead and use a password, and now you're going to actually get to see my secure password that I've been using. This is a very typical password that I've used very often in the classroom. It satisfies the uppercase and lowercase and a symbol and a number. That's the password that I've been using for my administrator account. So for username, we're going to go ahead and use administrator. And those are the credentials that will now be used when joining the domain. Uh-oh, we have to go a step back though. Let me click on identification. We have to select the domain that we're going to join. So we're going to say join the globomantics.com domain. So now if we were to just simply use this answer file on any given installation of Windows Server 2008, automatically as part of that installation, we will attempt to join the globalmantics.com domain using these credentials. And as long as we have connectivity with a domain controller that would allow us to do this, that'll all work. But let's go one step further. I'm going to actually scroll on this side. Let's scroll back up, and I want to go right here to Shell Setup and expand that. And actually, instead of expanding it, let me go ahead and just the whole shell setup. Let me right click, and again, we're going to add it to Specialize. A lot of the settings that you will do will be under this Specialize component of the unattended installation. And I know that seems a little confusing right now, but again, there is entire books that have been written on just how to set up a complete answer file with all 7 of these components with a very, very in-depth detailed configuration of a server. But the reason I added this one was to go ahead and set up a computer name. And so I'm going to go ahead and set up one more domain controller. We've set up a domain controller for Chicago, and we set one up for Tokyo, but we need one for our Dallas office. So I'm going to go ahead and put in DAL-DC1-2K8. Right? That's the name of the computer that we want to go ahead and set up in Dallas. All right, and then go ahead and just click away so it accepts that answer. And you'll see here that we could do other things. We could go ahead and enter product key as a for instance. We could specify what time zone it's going to be. Okay, and the list goes on and on and on if we were to come back over here and scroll through all these different possible settings. And there are a lot of them. I mean, there are literally thousands of individual settings that we could set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to File, and I'm going to say Save Answer File As. And then just right on the root of this computer, on the C drive, I'm going to go ahead and save this. You'll notice it's an XML document. And I'm just going to go ahead and save it as auto unattended. Now, this name doesn't really have any significance other than it's the default name. This is the default name that Windows will look for if you were even just doing a standard CD-based, or I should say DVD-based installation. In other words, if I were to take this auto unattended.xml document and put it on, let's say, a flash drive, and put that USB flash drive into a computer and then boot off the DVD, it'll automatically look for this file and use it. So I like to stick with the default name. You could name this really anything you want, though. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now that this has been saved, let's close out of the Windows System Image Master, or Image Manager, I should say. And back here on Windows Deployment Services, let's now select that particular file for an unattended installation for Server Enterprise. Right click, Properties, Allow Image to Install Unattended, select File, and I'm going to Browse, and I'm going to go to the computer, to the C drive, and then here I have Auto Unattended. Click OK, and OK. What I've just done is I've just made it that any other computer that connects to this Windows Deployment Services server and attempts to use this image for deployment will automatically have the name Dallas DC1 and will join the globalmantics.com domain. So to try this, let's go ahead and connect to a computer. Okay, here we are again on a blank computer, and we need to go ahead and start the computer and connect to the WDS server and begin the deployment of an operating system. Now, before I start this computer, I'd like to point out that we don't have a multicast session set up anymore, so we should not have to wait for any additional computers for this deployment to begin. So let me turn on the computer. Here we're waiting for DHCP, and press F12. And now Windows is loading files. This is going to be exactly the same as what we had before. We're going to have the same few selections as far as having to go ahead and select which operating system we want to use. Actually, I should say first we'll have to select a language and keyboard template, and then we'll have to go ahead and select which operating system, and then we'll have to select which hard disk partitioning selection we want to make. But otherwise, it's going to be the exact same thing. But the one difference that I'm going to want you to see here is I'm going to want you to see that we're not going to, first of all, have to wait for this multicast session. And then when it's complete, I want you to see that indeed the computer will be named Dallas DC1 and will have joined the globalmantics.com domain. All right, it'll be just another quick moment here. There we go. Now we have our locale, we have our keyboard and input method. Next, we need to enter our credentials. And now we can go ahead and select Enterprise. Next. And here's our disk partitioning. Next. And this time, notice that it says the installation will continue automatically once the server initiates your session. And this will happen almost immediately. There we go. That's all the information we need right now. It's copying the files, copied very quickly. Now it's expanding the files. It will install features, updates, and complete the installation. And once that does, I will be right back with you because, again, this could take a good 10, 20, 30 minutes depending on the speed of your computer. And when it's done, we'll go in and we'll take a look to see if indeed it's been named Dallas DC1. Okay, so that portion of the setup is now complete. So once again, let's just go ahead and click on Next. And accept the license terms, next, and start. And the only difference is this time, I'm going to go ahead and log in for the first time and see what the name of this computer is and see if it indeed has joined the globalmantics.com domain. So we will give this just a moment, and it should come right up with a logon screen and we'll be ready to go. Alright, it's applying the computer settings, and there we go. Press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to log on. So press Ctrl-Alt-Delete, click Other User. You'll notice that's the only choice because there's no user that's ever logged on yet. And here, right here it says log on to GlobalMantics. So that already is telling us that it should be a member of the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and put in GlobalMantics /administrator. And put in my password, log in, take just a moment here while it comes to the desktop. Remember that the desktop can take a little bit longer to create the first time you log in, and there we go. And what I want to do is wait for the initial configuration task tool to open, because we know it's going to open by default, it always does. There we go. And on this tool right here it says provide computer name and domain, and you'll notice that this computer's name is already Dallas DC1 as we asked for it to be, and it's already a member of the globalmantics.com domain. So what that means is our automated unattended answer file worked. Now, the one last thing I want to make sure that you absolutely know is exactly where to get the Windows Automated Installation Kit. I told you it was a free download from Microsoft. Well, on the screen I have the specific URL that you can use to download this tool. So feel free to pause the video and jot down this URL if you aren't able to locate it on your own. Alright, well, that's pretty much it for this video, and at this point you should now know how to describe Windows deployment services and the requirements necessary in order to utilize them. You should know how to install and configure the WDS role, and you should know how to create answer files using the Windows Automated Installation Kit to help automate your deployments.